I could honor you and still don't have no respect for you.
Tonight,
let's not repeat the same pattern that got us building over top of a cemetery in the first place.
Rooted in Progress is uncovering the injustices of Tampa Bay's Black community by sharing stories of our past.
A tisket, a tasket, I lost my yellow basket was written there.
Exposing present problems.
They destroyed the community for sports.
And unveiling the future for Black Tampa Bay.
In order to improve as a nation, we have to put some of these bad things aside.
Discussion spanning from erased cemeteries to gentrification to the impact artificial intelligence will have on minorities. Real issues, forcing tough conversations, bringing hope for the next generation. This is Honoring Black History, Rooted in Progress. Well, welcome to Honoring Black History, Rooted in Progress. I'm Deanne King. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Unearthing our past isn't always pretty, and pointing out present problems isn't always picture perfect. But looking ahead to our future is promising. Over the next hour, we are taking you on a journey through Tampa Bay's past, present, and future. We're joined tonight by our incredible studio audience, our esteemed panelists, lending their expertise on issues specifically impacting our Black community. We begin with a trip back in time to loved ones who are no longer with us.
In order to improve as a nation, we have to put some of these bad things aside.
At 83 years old, O'Neal Larkin has witnessed Black history be erased and covered up. Graveyards he once played in are now schools and office buildings. It's a problem we're seeing across Tampa Bay and across our nation.
You know, I think this had to be in the early 80s.
Unforgettable yet painful memories.
They was doing construction here, putting pipes in. And I just walked over here to not being nosy, being curious. And I looked in these coffin pieces and bones.
A grave injustice that 83-year-old O'Neal Larkin still sees the physical remnants of.
If you look closely, you see two different types of asphalt.
Which tells two different stories. This is Clearwater Heights, historically a Black neighborhood in Panelists County. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, this land used to be the North Greenwood Cemetery, a segregated cemetery where Blacks were buried. Larkin lived across the street.
These trees, when I was a boy, wasn't there. We not only played on this graveyard, we used to come out and hunt rabbits and birds. We, as young boys, used to go out there and sit on the grave and around the grave.
It was sacred land until it became profitable. In the 1950s, the city announced they were moving graves to make way for a school. But here's the problem. No graves were ever moved.
And I told them, this grave's out there. Sure enough, nobody believed it. They went out there and found graves.
2 years ago, archaeologists excavated the site. Teeth and bones found at the bottom of the school and hundreds of potential graves still underneath.
Why are they just now finding out that, you know, these housing complexes and things like that are built over top of a cemetery? It was like, you know, shocking and appalling.
Dr. Antoinette Jackson is a cultural anthropologist who leads the African American Burial Ground Project at USF. She studies desecrated cemeteries and is building a database for them.
And I started focusing around the country, learning that this was a national issue, not just Florida and not just the South.
Through her research, more than a dozen erased Black cemeteries have been found across Tampa Bay. Zion Cemetery, now a housing complex. Memorial Park, sold to a developer. St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery, now a human resources headquarters. This same exact pattern, the case for 140 desecrated cemeteries Jackson has discovered across the entire country. How did we get here?
The history, the entire history of the U.S., from slavery through segregation till now, created a system whereby Black cemeteries, Black humanity of Black people were pretty much discounted. A lot of this is coming up because of redevelopment. So when redevelopment happens, let's not repeat the same pattern that got us building over top of a cemetery in the first place.
Larkin hopes listening comes with action.
Tear this building down, and just maybe you come out here one day, one evening, and you hear some voices. use the word of Martin Luther King, free at last.
Some powerful words right there. I am joined now by our first set of panelists. We have State Representative Fentrice Driscoll. We also have Tampa City Councilman Mr. Luis Vieira and Hillsborough NAACP President Miss Yvette Lewis. Thank you all so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you.
I would like to start with you, State Representative Driscoll. You created legislation that went toward the erasure of Black African-American cemeteries. Where do we stand with that legislation? Have any of the communities actually received any of the funding that came with that?
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, for 4 years, I worked on getting legislation passed and signed into law that would actually create funding for communities when they encounter erased Black cemeteries. And so there's an entire grant program that the Department of State has with the new Office of Historic Cemeteries, which was created by this legislation. And the state, for the second year now, has put $1 million towards this. Now, we had a grant process towards the end of the year where entities, including the Black Cemeteries Network, which Dr. Jackson works with at USF,
Absolutely.
applying for these resources. And so we're waiting to see what the results of those are going to be.
Do we know when those results will come by any chance?
I'd have to check with the Department of State. You know, they kind of manage that process. But what I'm so glad about is that there's now the financial commitment to the research that we need, to making sure that communities have what they need when they encounter these cemeteries. And I know that Zion applied for a grant as well.
Yeah, well, we thank you for your advocacy with that. City Councilman Vieira, I want to bring you into here. We just saw the city sold a historic Black cemetery, right, to a developer. Why does this keep happening to Black cemeteries specifically?
You know, it's a legacy of injustice. You take people who during the Jim Crow era, you have 250 years of slavery from 1619, then followed by 100 years of Jim Crow, people who during their lives were so disrespected. And it's no surprise that in death, when they're no longer with us, when they're in the arms of God, their bodies are disrespected as well. Yeah. And it's on us to support efforts like what Representative Driscoll has been doing with the help of the NAACP to make sure that we get equity and restoration and to make sure that we make wrongs right, that we educate Americans and Floridians in our history, that painful history, and to know what we have to do to make those wrongs right.
Do we think we could ever see the city in a position again where they're selling a Black cemetery to a developer?
No, we need to have the right kind of diligent leadership to continue to see that we make wrongs right. You take a look at Memorial Park Cemetery, African-American veterans, the kind of disrespect that was had to that cemetery, and now how we're making wrongs right. So that's something that we're doing. We got to make sure to have accountability there.
Yeah, speaking of wrongs, a lot of injustice, especially when we look at history, racism, slavery. Ms. Lewis, you've asked City Council, city officials to create that Citizens Review Board to help eliminate injustices like this. Where do we stand with that, and what is your hope for city government officials?
The hope is that city government officials will definitely listen and form the committees, for one, for the resolution, and to keep intact what the people are asking for, and to engage the African American community on on what we want. So often we find city government telling us what is best for us. But you know, this is how we got here because our voices were silenced back then. And when city government continues to tell us what's best for us, they're really perpetuating and keeping that stereotype going where they are telling us what is best for us.
Yeah, you've asked for that board for a few years. Councilman Vieira, do you have any comments on that?
Sure,
on
and if
where?
you're speaking of the resolution board, I've had some private discussions with individuals. I obviously support it. I voted for the resolution. I think it's important for us to bring forth some key issues that we can talk about: affordable housing, zoning issues, restoration of rights, taking a look at returning citizens, voting rights, different issues like that for the committee. I obviously support that. I voted for the resolution and would be proud to support that in Tampa City Council. I think we have to have the issues before it that are going to be defined so that we can have that narrowly tailored focus on success for the city of Tampa, and again, in making wrongs right.
I actually want to bring in Representative Driscoll. Is there anything that we can do from a state level when it comes to advocating for injustices and making sure we're not repeating history?
Oh my goodness, yes, right? Like this is the entire purpose of all this work that I've been doing with these abandoned cemeteries. And something that's interesting to note, You know, when I would talk to my colleagues, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they were always interested in this. And it was a good opportunity to have conversations with them about our challenging history as a state. People forget Florida is a part of the South. I know we have Miami, and that's great, and it's, you know, super fun and everything, but we are a former slaveholding state. So we have to have those conversations to understand our history first, and that allows us to have the right perspective as we take corrective action in the present.
Ms. Lewis, I feel like you're in a position where you hear a lot from people in the community and throughout the neighborhoods. Do you feel like we're on our way? Do you feel like we're in the right direction here?
I feel like the community is definitely speaking up and saying what they're looking for, but I feel like the city of Tampa have not really given us the teeth. It has not really supported our ideas and our thoughts and our views on what we're looking for in our community. So the city of Tampa, city council, the administration, they really need to do more when it comes to supporting the African American issues and the values and what's going on, because we're losing a whole lot. Gentrification is real in our community, and if they have apologized for it, then let's put some teeth behind it.
Some action.
Working with the NAACP, our Founders Day is February the 12th. We've been around for well over 100 years. We ain't going nowhere.
There we go. Hey, we have one more question from a member of our studio audience, Miss Jacqueline Reese.
Representative Driscoll, is there any legislation that can be make historical black cemeteries national trade landmarks so they cannot be built on or removed?
Well, thank you for that question. So when a cemetery is known to be there, current law makes it such that you cannot build on top of it. I think what has happened is that there's been a lot of building on top of cemeteries that, unfortunately, back in the day, people knew those were cemeteries and the property exchanged hands, but now we're dealing with how do we treat those lands in the present day. In terms of national legislation, that would have to be something that Congress could look into, but what I can tell you is that the legislation that I was able to get across the finish line allows for historical markers, allows for funding and things of that nature so that we're taking care of those cemeteries as we find them.
Very good answer. Thank you all for your insight, especially with that. When we come back, we will continue our discussion on Tampa Bay's past, including a Tampa neighborhood decimated by gentrification and a home still surviving the test of time. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Rooted in Progress. As we continue moving through the past, there's one area of Tampa that seems to have been forgotten. Welcome to Dobyville. It was a thriving majority black neighborhood in Tampa until gentrification called its name. Now you know the region as Hyde Park, and what we know as the Leroy Selman Expressway cut right through the heart of that area. Farron Hip shares memories of Dobyville through those who knew the neighborhood best.
The West Hyde Park area was once known as Dobyville, named after a black man by the name of Richard C. Doby. And though no pictures of him have been recovered, the home where he once lived, still stands. And those that walked the streets worked to keep that distant memory alive. About 10% of Tampa's black population lived here during the 1920s. There were churches, businesses, and Dobyville School.
Dobyville, Dobyville, the school we love in West Hyde Park.
83-year-old Charles Davis still remembers the school song.
Well, Dobyville was a high point in my life, really.
He started going there in 1949. Now the pastor at the College Hill Church of God in Christ, he says the segregated school didn't have the best resources, but the lessons he learned were invaluable.
Everybody had to help everybody.
And he's not the only one to share in that sentiment.
Because everyone cared about your education, they cared about you as a person, and it was a lot of love.
At 70, Michelle B. Patty recalls going to the school from 1st to 6th grade. She takes pride in her Dobyville upbringing.
Fun thing, we were a village, so we had barbers, we had restaurants, there was shoe shine parlors with cleaners.
But try to find any of that or the Dobyville school today, and you'll only see this plaque nearby.
The crosstown interstate came through that area.
A portion of town was demolished to make way for this. Construction and integration led to the school's closing in 1966. The black working class citizens of Dobyville moved further north.
And I'm sorry that people didn't realize to preserve that school because it was actually a house. It was a wooden 2-story house.
Davis also recalls moments of missed opportunity.
Boy, get you an education and get out of here. And when I look back at it, I think they should have told me, get me an education and come back here.
While buildings from that era are almost entirely erased, there is a local historic designation to protect what's left, like Richard Doby's home. Plus, there will forever be the words of his namesake school song.
Dobyville, Dobyville, the school we love in West Hyde Park.
That sounds good, right? He did pretty well. Yeah. We are welcoming back our panel. We want to start with Ms. Lewis. Now, through the lens of the NAACP, why do you think black neighborhoods are the target for gentrification and redevelopment?
Because they were living on land back then that nobody wanted. They were living on land by the river, you know, popular areas that nobody wanted. And it was just, you know, just thrown to us because it was like, yeah. So now living by the river, living by the lake it's a popular thing these days. So their whole thing is pushing people out and getting black folks out, and which is called gentrification. A lot of our neighborhoods have been erased. That's pretty much it. Yeah. They want our land that we were there first, right. And now they're pushing us off. So, you know, they put up these plaques, which are good, but what are you giving to the people? You stole that, but then you give them a plaque. In the city of Tampa, black folks are the only race that has not benefited for the hardship they have endured at the hands of the city.
Yeah, wow. Speaking of the city, Councilman Vieira, we want to bring you in here. Now, you've had a long week, right? So you all recently actually had a very long meeting where you voted down to rebuild and have this huge condo on Bayshore Boulevard. Do you think those efforts are the same for black communities?
Well, can I say something, because I can't comment on that because that's a quasi-judicial.
Okay, do you think, based off of what she's saying, that now, since it's profitable for land that blacks historically owned, do you think that there are efforts from the city to make sure that you all don't keep targeting black communities?
I think it's a couple of things. Number one, you've got to have a Tampa populace that knows our history and that is able to learn from that history and not repeat the crises and the gross injustices and the violence that we've seen in the past, right? You take a look at areas right now that we want to invest in the city of Tampa. Just last week, I brought up Sulphur Springs for economic development, talking about different tools that we have, an area that's been tragically left behind, right? 6,000 folks in Sulphur Springs, about 50-60% of the kids there live in poverty. Taking a look at that area, we have to use the tools that we have in positions of power to assist those left behind and to not repeat the mistakes of the past. It goes to me, what Black History Month is all about, which is it's a time to acknowledge the people that we all know, right? Talk about the people that we should know, but also reflect on those voices and those names whose names we will never know, and to make sure that we don't repeat those tragedies.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that, there's actually a local house that may not look like much on the outside, but the fact that it is still standing serves as a metaphor of the resilience that defines Black history. We're talking about the Jackson House in downtown Tampa, taking a look at it right now. That home was built in 1901 and was the only lodging place for Black people during segregation. It hosted famous people like James Brown, Ella Fitzgerald, and even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. More than 100 years later, in its very fragile state, there are plans to restore the historic landmark for future generations, despite many people wanting it demolished.
They are trying to erase history that, in many instances, we will not let it be erased. And the thing that gets you read in here is when we look at what they're doing to the libraries and what they're doing to the books and what they're doing with diversity and equity and inclusion and what our Board of Governors just voted to put. There's some people that live over there in Encore that can look at this place and they send us a text, what can we do? Don't let them tear that house down, but we're tired of looking at that sore sight from our window. We want to see this beautiful rebuild.
The Jackson House is a historic national landmark, right? However, we never really have talks about destroying or rebuilding national landmarks like the National Monument. Is there legislation that we can put in place?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's take a step back, right? There's funding that's necessary, and it sounds like there's a foundation in place, which means there's a 501c3. I hope that there have been efforts to get funding for the Jackson House so that the state can have some skin in the game. And I think there actually are some of my colleagues who have been working on that over the years, but the state certainly needs to do its part in making sure that we are preserving this important history. And then the other thing I will say is we're in a very challenging time in our state when it comes to Black history. I know I probably don't need to tell you this, but when you have a governor who could stand on a podium and say that slavery conferred a benefit on the enslaved, or a governor who can attack AP African American history and say that there's a course like that that has no educational value, that just lets you know the times that we are living in. And so it is going to be imperative for those of us who believe in the preservation of Black history, who understand the importance of the Jackson House, to come together whether it's state, it's local, whether it's federal, working with our congressional partners to make sure that we are protecting this very important treasure.
Very, very well said. Now, we do want to bring in local business owner Jeanette Horge-Smith from our audience who has a question.
Thank you. This question is for Councilman Vieira. If we invest millions into restoring museums, how do we ensure that they serve today's communities and economically impact people of today?
That's a great question. We have to make sure that when we have museums, for example, on history, that we talk about all of our history. It is so important, like Minority Leader Driscoll talked about, to make sure that all of our American history is talked about. There are names just in Florida, just in Tampa, names like Robert Saunders, names like Harry T. Moore, names like Harriet Moore, names like Willie Howard and Live Oak and so many others that too many of our Floridians don't know. When we invest in our museums, we have to make sure that we equip people with the knowledge that they need to be good Americans who know their history and who know the obligation that good Americans have to make wrongs right today.
Thank you, Councilman. We also have a question from Mr. Chandler Patton.
Ms. Lewis, we have a community activist and pastor here today. In what ways can the people in the community help with the progression of the Black community?
Put pressure on the city of Tampa. Let your voice be heard. Go to city council. Have a conversation with the mayor's office. Let them know that moving our history, erasing our history, or going to a better building because that building is not pretty. I often say our history is not pretty, but why should it be torn down, ripped apart, and moved down the street? Because it doesn't look good in this spot here. So we talk about the Jackson House. You move it, that's fine, but it loses its historic value once you move it. So that is so important. Our schools have lost its historic value because they have moved it. But I encourage everyone, go to your city council people, know who you're voting for, know what they stand for, because those are so important. Because we're down at city council all the time, every Thursday, and we're still getting nothing. We're getting broken promises.
Well, thank you so much for that. Also, thank you, Minority Leader Driscoll, for joining us. Tampa City Councilman Louis Vieira and Hillsborough NAACP President Yvette Lewis for joining us for this program. When we return, we're jumping from the past to the present. We'll uncover issues plaguing African Americans now and show you how St. Petersburg residents are pushing to hold the city accountable. Welcome back to Rooted in Progress. I'm Deanne King. Now, as we move through present-day Tampa Bay, there's one thing that's pretty prevalent across our area. It's new development. All you got to do is look, right? And as we heard from Dobyville residents earlier in the program, gentrification is constantly evolving and changing. And what's old is simply becoming new again. Right now in St. Pete, there's a battle underway to get this built as quickly as possible. Take a look here. It's a $1.3 billion stadium, and we're talking 30,000 seats for Rays games and 35,000 for concerts and other events. As St. Pete City Councilors meet to discuss the final plans, the area's longtime residents are reflecting on what the area used to be. Lenny Supal has the story of the historic gas plant district through the eyes of a husband and wife.
A 60-year-old love story.
It all started at the gas plant district.
Yes, and that is really something.
The gas plant district, the foundation of Ada and Clarence Davis's relationship and a cornerstone of St. Petersburg's Black community. The neighborhood surfaced in the early 1900s, but Ada's story begins in 1940. She was born when the district was thriving.
We could run down the street, nobody bothered us. There were families on both sides.
The neighborhood was bustling. Black-owned businesses and churches defied the odds.
When I look at some of the people I grew up with, and I said, God, you were good. You were good, in spite of segregation.
But in the 80s, the gas plant became a bullseye for redevelopment.
The next thing I knew, it was all torn down. The whole community was demolished. To me, destroyed. I mean, not just demolished, but destroyed.
The city made way for a baseball stadium now known as Tropicana Field.
To me, it's an abhorrent. It represents destruction. They destroyed the community for sports.
More than 375 families pushed out. They were given false promises of jobs and economic opportunity.
It's been 40 years.
Yeah, 40 years. And we still waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting to see what's going to happen.
The next chapter comes with another wave of redevelopment as plans to rebuild Tropicana Field take shape. St. Petersburg Mayor Ken Welch pledging to honor the city's vow to the historic district by creating affordable housing in the surrounding area.
Today we take a significant step towards honoring the promises made to the gas plant community some 40 years ago.
But it could still take many years before that dream is realized, according to local advocates.
There's a chance that we could continue the displacement that originally happened and further exacerbate the problem. I just don't believe that that's what St. Pete represents.
But Ada Davis is hopeful the city will follow through on its promise.
We're going to rise and shine because the light has come. I'm excited to have grown up in that gas plant district.
The gas plant district. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have another panel here. We have St. Pete Council Chair, Ms. Deborah Figgs Sanders. Thank you for being here. We also have Ms. Chloe Coney, the founder of Corporation to Develop Communities of Tampa. We have community advocate David Christian, also Senior Vice President and Regional Manager for Community at Regions Bank, and Hillsborough County Commissioner, Ms. Gwen Myers. We're going to start with you, Council Chair Figgs Sanders. So, with this gas plant district project, we have been told millions are going to be invested, especially into the Black community. How are you making sure that that happens?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and we are just so honored that everyone is taking attention to what we have with our historic gas plant project. As it was stated before, the city is going to make a $287 million investment. The county is making a $312 million investment, and the Rays themselves are making a $700 million investment into the gas plant area. So as far as where we are and trying to finalize that, the Community Benefits Agreement Council, we just met last Tuesday with our recommendations, and the duties of that committee was to ensure that the community benefits from that project were in line with what they were proposing.
And we appreciate your efforts with that. Ms. Coney, you have done so much work, especially through the CDC, revitalizing especially areas of East Tampa and creating affordable housing for minorities. You've also been involved with the gas plant district. Can you explain how?
You know, it's very critical as we talk about Tampa and St. Pete. Both of those neighborhoods are historic African-American communities.
Absolutely.
And of course, working with Congresswoman Castor, that was her district, and we made sure we brought some funding in for that. And being involved in other initiatives, the One Community Plan, I must commend St. Pete and their community. But you know, I've served the last 40 years in East Tampa, where CDC is. And we had the same problems of blight and poverty. And when you look at communities that have not been invested in, disinvested in, for over 30-some years, and that was East Tampa, we saw there in our community where most people that were home ownership during segregation time, then in 1990 to 2000, about 10,000 people left, 10% of the people left. Then 2000, now we have about 20%. All this where the land now is not ownership. It's investors coming in and taking over our community, gentrification.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate all of the work. Again, 40 years investing into the East Tampa area. Mr. Christian, we're talking about affordable. What does that look like? We have middle-class residents who don't qualify for affordable housing. What are solutions to that?
the folks sitting on this panel today. It takes partnerships with major business, certainly banks. It takes partnership with city, county, state. You can't really deliver an affordable project without significant subsidy from some state or federal entity. The banks can play their part, and we certainly do, and we'll bring capital, we'll bring additional investments into those projects. But to make those rents affordable for an individual, whether it's single family or multifamily, to build those out of the ground with today's cost, you've got to have equity from either a federal or state partner that makes those projects affordable.
Yeah, and speaking of those partners, Commissioner Myers, can you speak to some of the affordable housing efforts that you are bringing in, especially in your role?
And thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
One of the things when we look at our role and what we can bring in, David said it best, is the partners. But also that we must make sure in bringing in the partners that they're going to build 80% below, 60% and 50% of the median income. So when you look at 40 years ago, could they really afford it now? If it's below the 80%, the threshold, yes. And that's what we want when the new development comes and we say affordable.
Right.
We're setting aside that area within the affordable market for families and individuals to be able to afford new housing. It is one of the largest assets that a person can own.
Yep.
And when we look at this, particularly over in St. Pete, the economic impact that is going to make, and hopefully they will all make a decision by April, so we'll know what's going to be affordable for everyone.
Absolutely. I want to bring in our studio audience. We have Ms. Lori Radis with Hillsborough Aging Services who has a question.
Good morning. Commissioner Myers, with the rising cost of housing and a lot of seniors living on a fixed income, what is being done to make housing more affordable for them?
Thank you so much for your question. We have, through the Hillsborough County Affordable Housing Department, we're building 2 new complexes that would just for seniors. And that's a good thing because usually it's for everyone else to qualify, but this is 55 and older senior. We just built one in District 2, and we have another one we're going to break ground. I think on the 11th, no, not the 11th, the 21st of this month for seniors. And if we're not building the new homes, we're renovating apartment complexes so that seniors can move in. Thank you.
And thank you for that response. Now, affordable housing, we could talk about all day.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to afford to buy a house, right? But hey, still to come, we'll actually have some more discussions with our panel on the actual future of our area. And we're going to focus on a recent report outlining the Bay Area's economy and the trends that define our community. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. Now, as we continue focusing on the present day, we're taking a closer look into our local economy. The Tampa Bay Partnership Foundation and a few other groups, they put together an equity report to see how wealth was being distributed. And here's what that data shows. Take a look here. Nearly a third of Tampa Bay's white residents have at least a bachelor's degree compared to a fifth of black residents. Minorities, including blacks and Hispanics, are 32% less likely to own a home compared to white people. And black people are twice as likely to be living in poverty. The median wage per hour for black people is 21% lower than a white person, but that is the smallest gap on the 20 regions outlined in that report. Y'all, we're just scratching the surface here. Black people make up a little more than 11% of the Tampa Bay's population, but there are more black people actually in the labor force than white people. And black workers are still almost twice as likely to be unemployed compared to our white counterparts. That's a lot to digest there, but it honestly just shows a lot of the disparities within our community. We want to bring in our panel here. Blacks are 32% less likely to own a home. Mr. Christian, I want to ask you, we've talked about that first step to wealth actually being home ownership. How is that possible when the odds are stacked against the black community?
It's never easy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, you know, it all gets back to education. So much of it comes back to education, understanding what's available to you. Yeah. You know, understanding, you know, it's real important. Get to know a banker. Bankers are not bad people. We're really good people who are trying to make sure that the communities that we are a part of are functioning and surviving. If our communities don't survive, we don't survive. It's a business continuum. So first you've got to be educated. Educate yourself on the necessary programs. Commissioner Myers mentioned understand where you are in terms of your own income strata and what's available to you, not only as an individual, but as a family.
Absolutely. I feel like money is one of those topics where people kind of clinch up a little bit to start talking about money and finances. Mrs. Coney, I want to ask you what resources are out there for minorities looking to own a home? You've done a lot of work with that.
Being the founder of CDC, and my son now, Ernest Coney Jr., is now the CEO. As they were mentioned about partnership, is very critical. As CDC started 31 years ago, our first partnership we had was Bank of America, and David Christian is sitting here, they're working with us. We built 25 single-family homes there. In 31 years, CDC has built over 100. It's critical that we always preach in our Black community about home ownership. That's generational wealth for our families. Absolutely. It's critical we do that.
And it starts with education and knowing that those programs are available. Commissioner Myers, with the current wealth and poverty gaps, are there solutions being discussed, especially when you're looking at serving 1.5 million constituents in Hillsborough County?
Yes, we always are talking about solutions and how people can become a homeowner, but there are also programs for individuals and families who just want to renovate the home that mother or dad left them. And if they stay there for 10 years, they become, it's no mortgage payment for them. And that's another part, and David, you said it correctly, when we educate, because a lot of times we don't know that we can have the home renovated, okay? But when those, to fix up and make our community look good, that's what we want. Okay, and that's very meaningful because now you're building equity. You can talk to the neighbors, said, hey, I got me a loan. Let me tell you where you can go, city or the county. We have programs to help you.
We got to help our neighbors, everybody out there. I want to bring in Council Chair Fig Sanders. In what ways are you working to combat these wealth and poverty gaps over in St. Pete?
We are really looking into our economic workforce development and making sure, as was said earlier, that we are training up and upskilling, job skilling, increasing the talents for it. But one of the things that I found extremely important in the Black community is when we have these homes, and land is legacy. And when grandmothers work so hard to pay off a home, don't lose it. Don't give it back. You know, it's one thing when they take it, it's another thing when we give it away, because they will come and they will purchase a home from you for $100,000, $150,000, fix it up and put it back on the market for $500,000. Wow. We are giving away our own legacy. We're giving away our own equity and our earnings from that. And I strive and stress over and over again when I want our community to realize, if you have land, keep it, because land is legacy. But as far as the city is concerned, we're definitely trying to build programmatically and opportunities with our Office of Supply and Diversity and educating them as to what it takes to be sustaining, to actually learn and live in St. Petersburg.
This is everybody at home right now like, okay, I got that. Those are some good gems. I really appreciate that. We want to bring in our audience. Dr. Jamaris Glenn has a question.
Yes, as we just heard, there's a clear disparity in minority businesses trying to get access to loans and different type of funding. So, Mr. Christian, my question is to you. What advice or suggestions would you have for Black business owners like myself or aspiring entrepreneurs trying to gain more access to those loans?
You know, it depends upon where you are in your business life cycle. You know, 1 to 2 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 years or more. And why do I say that? Because there's what I call traditional as well as non-traditional capital. You think of traditional capital, right? Bank loans, that comes to mind. But in non-traditional financing, you've got venture capital funds. And there are a number of funds that now are targeted specifically to Black businesses, minority businesses as a whole. We don't have enough, but at least they do exist. Secondly, you've got organizations called community development financial institutions. They can structure terms differently, have a different set of rates. So oftentimes we often think that a bank is the only place we can go to for capital, and that's not the case.
Absolutely. Well, we have several people sitting on the panel. I think people in our community now see resources that they can reach out to let them know and help them get educated. Thank you all so much for joining us and being part of this very important discussion. We're going to toss a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Rooted in Progress. As we look ahead to the future of Tampa Bay, we're going to break down some key areas we haven't talked about. We're talking technology, mental health, and improving trust between the Black community and law enforcement. Bringing in our wonderful panel here, we are joined by Ms. Tashana Wilson, an expert in AI. We also have Dr. Lisa Martin, a clinical psychologist and racial trauma expert. We have Chief Anthony Holloway with the St. Petersburg Police Department, and we have Hillsborough County School Board member, Mr. Henry Shake Washington. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, Ms. Wilson, I want to start with you. AI, I feel like everybody is talking about AI. Talk about the kind of impact we can expect to see, especially on the Black community.
If we have diverse data sets and we have diverse engineers, I think it'll be a great impact on the Black community.
Wow, even with jobs?
Yes, even with the jobs.
Okay.
AI is coming in and it's kind of taking over, you know, the customer service, the warehouse jobs. But right now it's coming in as an aiding tool. And so it'll also help Blacks progress within their career to the next level.
We actually have a question for you. We're going to bring in our audience. Abdullah Jabbar has a question for you. Okay.
Ms. Wilson, given the current climate of Islamophobia, how can AI be used to promote inclusivity, especially in teaching forgotten Black Muslim history?
It depends. So if we take some data set, you know, that's around the Muslim community, and we train a model specifically for the Muslim community, it can include everyone. But it goes back to me talking about those data sets that have to be diverse. So right now, if we look at the data sets in language or facial recognition, it gears towards one race. Yeah. But if we can bring in those engineers, train up different people in different races to become AI experts, become AI engineers, then everyone will be inclusive.
Representation within AI pretty much is the answer to that. Now, let's talk about mental health. That's something that becomes a little uncomfortable for the Black community. Cecil Robinson has a question for you, Dr. Martin.
So for Dr. Martin, what are some ways we can deal with racial trauma?
Okay, so racial trauma, I think first we should define what it is. Racial trauma can be described as the spiritual, emotional, and physical impact of experiencing a racist incident, but most often actually of just existing in a society where racism is the smog that we breathe. So I think that because it has such holistic impacts for us, the way that we respond to it, the way that we can heal through it has to also be holistic. So this means attending to our bodies, feeding it well, moving it well, therapy of course, but also being in community with one another, attending to our spiritual needs, breathing, all of those things, just really a holistic approach to health and healing and living.
Thank you for that comment. Chief Holloway, you're back with us again this year, which we appreciate. And you know, last year we talked about some of the efforts the police department, St. Pete Police, were actually implementing to build and strengthen those relationships between the Black community. Where are you all now? What programs have you implemented over the past year?
So thank you for having me here again. So the next thing that we've started, we call our CALL program, Community Assistant Life Liaison. And we looked at is why are we sending police officers to non-violent calls? Why are we sending, non-criminal calls? Because you don't need the badge and you don't need the gun. You need someone to go in there that is a professional to help that person through a crisis that they're going through. My child won't go to school. You don't need a police officer. Or my child having difficulties. You need someone like the doctor. You need someone to come in there that can work with the citizen through that issue. So that's what we've done. We've taken law enforcement, instead of trying to figure out how to make an arrest, is how to help that person through their crisis.
Yeah, that's incredible. And we thank you for all of the efforts that you have done with St. Pete Police. We actually have Pastor Alan Harris who has a question for you.
Chief Holloway, what correlation do you see between unemployment and violence within our communities? And if any correlation, what do you suggest on how to combating it?
Thank you for that question. There's really no correlation that we're seeing about people being unemployed and violent crime. Because again, you have to start looking at is, if the people are committing crime, are they committing crime because they need food on the table? And we worked that out here in Panelists. I know Tampa had the same thing, where in that program, we're not, so to speak, arresting people for that. They're getting a second chance. because if you're trying to put food on your table, then the program is called APAD, Adult Pre-Arrest Diversion, because we want to make sure we can work through that. Now, if you're out there breaking into jewelry stores and things like that, you're not trying to put food on the table, you're trying to commit a crime. So we haven't really seen a correlation between violent crime and people that are out of jail. Most of the violent crime you really see is people trying to fight still over, so to say, ages, drugs.
Wow.
You know, that's my drug territory, so that's what I'm fighting over.
Yeah, hopefully somehow, someday that'll end, right?
Hopefully.
Mr. Washington, we're actually going to have a question from local teacher Amanda LaFoe.
Mr. Washington, will the Hillsborough County School District create a Tampa Bay Black History curriculum or implement paid cultural field trip opportunities?
Thank you for asking that question. You know, as now we do have black curriculums going on now because the school system never stopped with the African American history. We still have African American history, but we have benchmarks we have to meet. So during this period of time while we are working on redoing it, we are also teaching it. But we just can't use the woke program. We can't talk about the bad time, the inequalities, the racism, because that's the state statute now that was given by the governor. So we're working on that. We also have other things we're doing, like the Brain Bowl, the Black Brain Bowl, which would be at Howard W. Blake High School on the 23rd. So we are continue working on the curriculum to improve. And also we have the Thurgood Marshall Club too, where we talk about law enforcement and with blacks.
Mr. Washington, I want to ask you kind of a two-part question here. With these new parameters, how are you feeling about this? And another parameter are the book bans. How do we kind of get around that and circumvent LGBTQ plus conversations about different periods within Black history when we're dealing with that kind of line with the book ban?
Well, you know, it's all about how and she's been a teacher. You know, it's all about how you make delivery, how you deliver the message. Because I think the state is thinking about when we deliver the wrong way, it'd be racism. People want to fight, they want to riot. But you have to do it in a solid manner. You can't just talk about all bad. It's good and bad. But you can't, and I'm a firm believer in this at 74 years old, because I've been through the good and the bad.
Yeah. You
just can't talk about all good and not have bad, because that's part of history.
Right.
You know, that's the part you're going to have to deal with.
Right.
And without that, you're not being true to history. Yeah. Not at all.
For sure. Well, we thank each and every one of you for your input and for your time and being a part of this very important conversation. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. I want to leave you with this quote from Ida B. Wells. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. This program, it's our light, discussing real problems and being honest about solutions. The road to progress, the fight for equality, it's ongoing, and we all have a role to play. Your voice, your vote, your advocacy, it's so important. My hope is that this program inspires you to figure out your call to action. You've heard the problems, you see the disparities. Now, what are we going to do about it? It's not just up to our leaders. We stand on the shoulders of so many giants, and I'm here today because of my ancestors. We must continue to make them proud and continue to stay rooted in progress. I would like to thank our incredible panelists who joined us, our phenomenal audience members, Lenny Sue Paul, Fair and Hip, our incredible production team, and everybody who helped bring this special to life. I'm Deanne King. Thank you for joining us. Good night.